Wayne Carey, welcome back to BackPageLead Vidcast. How you going?
Good.
Interesting week of footy. Richmond
didn't miss a kick.
You saw all 8 games, did you?
Just about, yeah.
Well done, you. Richmond's defeat of Sydney on Sunday has kind of opened up the whole shebang a bit, hasn't it?
Always going to happen around this time of year, Charlie, when you've got a side like Richmond that has nothing at all to lose, and then you've got a side like Sydney which tightened up with the pressures of having to win to stay in the 8. In actual fact, I thought that would be the case maybe with the Bombers and the Bulldogs, but it just goes to show you that maybe the Bombers a little bit ahead of Sydney in terms of how they're approaching going into the 8. So a big tick to the Bombers for beating a side that many thought would finish in the top 4, playing with I don't think a great deal of pressure, because I reckon the finals were gone for them. Essendon having to play to win to stay in. And vice versa, like you said, Richmond really playing with no pressure, Sydney really tightening up and very disappointing.
What do you think of the theory that Sydney plays its best footy at the SCG, and when the weather was pretty warm like it was on Saturday on a big ground, they're a bit slow?
I think Sydney have proven that they're generally competitive on any ground they play on. They're a hardened side, and they generally give you value for money. They didn't on the weekend. Now I'm putting it down to purely tightening up, coming into the finals, having to win. Richmond playing with no pressure whatsoever, and to Richmond's credit, because they've been pretty terrible for most of the year.
They have.
They played, they played some good footy, and they got the job done.
So Freo and North and even Melbourne. If you're an optimistic Melbourne supporter,
no chance.
No chance. Okay. No. Scrap Melbourne.
Sorry, Melbourne.
Freo and North. Still some chance.
Oh, look, I think...
And they play each other this week.
Yeah, look, I think, this week, really tantalising week to watch footy. So I'll sit down and watch... I'd like to watch all of those games going into the finals, especially just to see how each side handles this week, because a lot of those are mini finals this week, no doubt. I mean, obviously, West Coast, it's a mini final for me, because West Coast, Carlton play Hawthorn. They're vying for a top 4 position, as is West Coast. So West Coast will want to beat the Bombers for top 4. Essendon will want to win to remain in the top 8, or cement themselves into the top 8. So, there's a lot of permutations, and I'm really looking forward to it.
What did you make of Hawthorn's performance on the weekend against Port, which I know isn't providing much opposition at the moment, but they seem to be faring pretty well without Roughhead, don't they?
Yeah, look, one of the things, and I've said it for a couple of weeks now, Hawthorn are the one side still just creeping under the radar. No one's talking about them. Well, ever you got Cyril Rioli and Franklin playing the way they're playing, Hawthorn are an ominous side. And I think they'll, I think Hawthorn are a side that can win the premiership. I think Geelong have shown they're capable. Carlton, get one or two key defender back maybe this week. Jamison, they're capable. While Murphy and Judd are in the form they're in, they're certainly capable of giving it a shake as well. But the one thing, talking about blowouts, I think the thing that has stood out this year is when a good side's playing a poor side, sometimes the players can mentally relax a little, hence you don't get the blowout. I think the players have come to the realisation this competition is a close competition, and when they play a side, there's no more relaxing. They really want to bury them, and I think we've seen sides really bury sides that are a lot weaker than them, and Port Adelaide right now are just about on their knees. I think this is the weakest Port Adelaide side that they've ever fielded.
But is it the weakest side we've seen in the AFL for a long time?
Oh, well, no. Well, I think they'd be still ahead of the Suns in terms of if they had their best side on the park and the Suns put their best side. I think you'd still go with Port Adelaide in terms of talent.
Okay, I'm taking the Suns out of the equation. An established team.
Port Adelaide right now are the weakest side, the weakest Port Adelaide side they've ever.
Which side's been weaker in the last 20 years?
I think Fitzroy were pretty poor there for a while. I think there's been some weak sides. I think the Brisbane Bears at one point were pretty poor. I can remember back Sydney Swans being very poor many years ago. Richmond have been poor for a long time, including this year for a fair part of it. Look at Melbourne's up and down year. They've been as poor as anyone. So let's not pick too much on Port Adelaide, but they were terrible on the weekend.
You mentioned Rioli and Franklin. Their partnership might be the best show in town at the moment, mightn't it?
Oh, you'd buy a ticket to go and watch them. There's no question about that. I think they're awesome. Cyril, when he's up and going, he's an excitement machine, and we know what Buddy can do. Look, if Buddy became that one clunk mark above his head, he would be unstoppable. I mean, he's 6'7", 6'8", and when he puts his arms up, he's just, you can't stop him.
So when you say, is that the one kind of minor chink in his game that he doesn't?
I think so, and I think it's sort of common knowledge that
if
he got better in that area, then he'd be
a pack mark.
He'd be a better, pack mark just above his head in general, I think.
So at this stage, you'd rate them a some chance, or
what do you mean some?
No,
Charlie.
I'm talking against Collingwood, which
Charlie. We saw St Kilda go down by 19 points on the weekend against Collingwood. St Kilda back to their best defensively, and showed that Collingwood are beatable. And I think St Kilda were in that game the whole night. Look, the premiership's wide open. For anyone that thinks Collingwood's home and hose, think again. There's no question that premiership's wide open. I think that Hawthorn, definitely Hawthorn, definitely Geelong, and then you throw Carlton, West Coast into that mix. West Coast get 2 home finals. They finish in the top 4. Yeah. Boy, oh boy, they're quite capable of winning those 2. Then coming to the G on one occasion on grand final day, anything can happen.
Okay. Okay, you've been told Pie supporters don't take anything for granted.
I don't think the Pie supporters would be. I don't think they'd be counting their chickens. But look, the history's littered with.
It is.
It's littered with it. I mean, Geelong, Hawthorn themselves beat Geelong in 08. And Geelong were easily favourites and easily the better side for that year.
Yeah. Essendon 2001.
Essendon in 93.
Essendon in 93.
The Crows in 97, 98.
Beat your boy.
Finished fifth both of those years, not the best side, won back-to-back premierships.
So it can happen. Now, 2 of those teams you mentioned, Carlton and Hawthorn, play on Friday night, and it should be a really cracking game, shouldn't it? And Carlton look like they might get back Michael Jamieson at full-back to play, perhaps on Franklin.
Yeah, he's been out for a while, but I'd throw him straight back into the deep end, and we're coming into the finals. You'd throw him onto Buddy. Yep. Mightn't play the whole game there, but you'd certainly say give it a go. It'll tell us a lot about both, and we're probably maybe more about Carlton than Hawthorn. With Cyril and Buddy forward. Ken Carlton, without Jamieson, you'd think they'd struggle to match up against Hawthorn's forwards. But look, we know, like, we've got Mitchell, you've got Sewell, you've got those guys running through the midfield of Hawthorn. But, the Judd Murphy combination right now is probably as good as any combination in the AFL. Yeah. I mean, that's, you had the Fab Four of Brisbane back in the halcyon days. You've had the Cats. Those 2 in particular, they're just combining beautifully.
They're leading pretty much every media award, I think.
It's going to be a very interesting Brownlow this year. It might be one I even tune into to see what happens.
Judd at $1.50.
Judd at $1.50. Murphy, you'd have to think, will take a lot of votes off him. We know Judd polls. Doesn't matter. I mean, Judd polled 3 votes when Collingwood beat them by 10 goals last year. No. Swan had 40 possessions, so we know that he polls. We don't know too much about Murphy and how the umpires view him. He's about as high as a dwarf, so he mightn't be
a vertically challenged person.
He mightn't stand out as much as Chris. Chris does break those lines, hence stand out. He's had an awesome year.
I know it's Monday, and we're 5 days out from the game. Just quickly on Hawthorn Carlton, who would you be inclined to go for at this early stage of the week?
Look, right now, I'd probably stick with the Hawks. I think the Hawks might, just purely because of those 2 X factors in their forward line. Yeah. I think if they can close down Judd or a Murphy, which is easier said than done, then I might give the edge to the Hawks. Going to be a ripping game. Really looking forward to it.
Let's talk about this issue that involved Stephen Milne over the weekend. It was on Friday night, where he was apparently abused by a very small section of the Collingwood crowd, Collingwood supporters, where an incident from a few years ago, which he was never actually charged with, he and Lee Montagna and 2 women, he keeps being reminded of that, and I think the fact that Mick Malthouse, the Collingwood coach, came out and called him a rapist last year sort of hasn't helped his cause. What can be done about that? What can be done about the crowd, or is that just part of the game?
I've heard people saying that Eddie's got to do something about it. I mean, Eddie doesn't have to do anything about it. I just think you're going to get small-minded people that think that if they say those types of things to players, they get an edge that it affects the player. I can assure you that those sort of things on the day wouldn't affect Stephen Milne. What's sad is those things affect his wife, his family, his mother, his grandmother, his cousins, his aunties, his uncles, all of those people, and that's what's disappointing. Generally, the player can handle it. He knows part and parcel of being an AFL footballer. Sometimes that's going to happen to you, but just really disappointing. Those things shouldn't be yelled out. There's kids around. There's young kids around at the footy. Give it a spell. I think it's.
What can you hear when you're out on the ground?
It's all been done and dusted. Hence you can handle it because you don't hear too much of it. You don't. It's not something that really you're there to do a job, and you're generally focused on that job. So, like I said, it's not even affecting him. So for those who think that it affects them, I think, Collingwood supporters used to call me a wanker every time we played Collingwood, and
just a wanker.
It didn't affect us too much because we used to beat them every time. So. That really doesn't have any effect. If anything, it probably fires some players up.
But you hear it when you're sort of on the boundary line having a set shot for goal or something like that. Presumably when you're in the middle of play, you wouldn't hear a thing.
As I said, you don't, doesn't bother you whatsoever. It's just the people around you, and generally the people involved with that particular player that it affects, not the player. So maybe grow up.
Did you ever feel like leaning over the fence and throttling someone?
No. No.
The screamers, you mentioned Adam Good's mark before.
Yep.
It's the latest in a long line of speckies. Like they're making a comeback this year, and I don't know whether it's got anything to do with the sort of slowing down of the game and the fact that there are kind of more long kicks and one-on-one contests.
I just think that they're definitely kicking the ball longer and to more contests, whether that be one-on-one contests or packs. And look, I think players are getting. The skill of players is as good as it's ever been. So, they see an Adam Goods behind in terms of, coming from behind. So they make sure they put the ball in that position to give him the best chance at it. And athletically, the players are as good as we've ever seen them as well. So their leap and their athleticism is second to none in any sport.
Andrew Walker, Andrew Cracker, Nick Natanui, Goods. It's a tough one to pick this year.
Tough one. I'm still leaning towards Andrew Cracker.
Because it's a pack mark.
Because it's pack mark, just as high as the others, under real pressure, and got that second lift. Took it in the hands. Yeah, I just really like that one. Walker's was great, as was Goods on the weekend, and Natanui's was superb. But for some reason, I don't know, I like Crackers.
Now, just a slightly left field one. Israel Folau kicked 6 on the weekend.
Yeah,
I think they're playing Belconnen, which is sort of not perhaps elite grade opposition. But
I also saw the kicking style as he was kicking those 6.
Not happy with them?
No, he tremendous athlete. Big step up from there to play an AFL footy. But doing well. You can only do what's put in front of you, and he's kicked 6 on the weekend, and I wish him all the best, but I think it's going to be very difficult for him.
In 2012, Kevin Sheedy was on radio today saying he probably had 1 or 2 reservations when Folau was first signed, but now he can see a glimmer of hope that he might actually make it.
You just hit the nail on the head with one word there, glimmer of hope. That's not. I wouldn't say that's a huge confidence booster saying there's a glimmer of hope.
Yeah, maybe that's my word, not his, but that was the gist of it, yeah.
Okay, well, if the gist of it was glimmer, I'd agree with Kevin. There is a glimmer.
We have North and Fremantle next week, as you say, which is 9 versus 10. We've got Sydney and St Kilda, West Coast and Essendon, and of course Carlton and Hawthorn. So it's a bumper round 22.
It is, and we've touched on a few of the other games. North Freo is a massive one too. North have still got some chance of making the 8, as has Fremantle. So the winner of that one still could sneak in.
So you'll be watching all 8 games this weekend as well?
Watching all 8 games. Those are the 4 games that I'll be focusing on: the Carlton, Hawthorn, North Freo, Sydney St Kilda, West Coast Essendon. I think they're the ones that have the say on what's going to happen later in the year. So if you like a punt on the footy, I think they're the ones that you sort of have your money around those, because the North Freo, I'd say the odds are going to be quite juicy. Same with Sydney St Kilda, West Coast Essendon. you'd say they'd be all right too. And Carlton Hawthorn, I mean, they're all games that are going to be fairly tightly held, I think. So maybe an all up.
What do you mean a multi?
Hawthorn into the Kangaroos, into St Kilda, into West Coast. You might be looking at 8-9 to 1 there. Just have your $20 for the week on that one.
Not that we encourage.
Gamble responsibly.
We encourage betting. Wayne Carey, thanks very much for your thoughts.
No worries, thanks Charlie.